Good morning. We are looking at Psalm 28 today. I have a study Bible, and in my study Bible, I'm supposed to title every chapter of scripture that I read. And the title I have for Psalm 28 is Hear Me When I Call. And you will see why that's, I think, a pretty good title for this psalm. So David starts out by saying, To thee, O Lord, I call. My rock, do not be deaf to me, lest if thou be silent to me, I become like those who go down to the pit. Hear the voice of my supplications when I cry to thee for help, when I lift up my hands toward thy holy sanctuary. David is crying out to God, begging God to listen to him. And there is a word in those two verses that I think is a word that is rich in meaning, and it's the word supplication. It's not a word that we use that much today, but it's a great word because it's the word that implies that it's an action of coming before this great power and begging or pleading, asking for a favor or asking for help, knowing that in humility you are not able to do this, but that this power is able to grant this favor, give you this help. And that is the way David is coming before the Lord. You know, he is begging God to hear him. And it made me think of when my daughter Christine was very little, and she would say, listen to me, Mom. And sometimes I would say, I'm listening, but I'd also be doing lots of other things. And sometimes she would pull me down to her level, and she would put her hands on my cheeks, and she would put her face right in front of mine and say, no, Mom, listen. And I feel like that's what David is doing in this moment. He's saying, God, please listen to me. You know, sometimes we tend to think of God as if he were human. And I thought of a movie, maybe you saw this movie, Bruce Almighty, where Morgan Freeman plays God. And he chooses this random man, Bruce, to give him the power of God for 1 week. And in the movie, they use that song, I've got the power. And Bruce is going around and doing all these fabulous things with the power of God. But at some point, Bruce becomes completely overwhelmed because he starts to hear hundreds and thousands and hundreds of thousands and millions of prayers pouring in to God, and he gets completely overwhelmed. And I think sometimes that's the way we feel about our prayers going up to God. God certainly can't hear all the prayers of all the people who are praying in the world. And yet, God says, no, I am El Shammah, the God who hears. And this is the beautiful thing we see in Psalm 28, the God who hears. And we can be reassured of that. And as I was thinking about this, I thought, you know, there is one moment in Scripture where I would have understood if God did not respond to a prayer. And that was the moment when Jesus was being crucified. Because in that moment, he's physically overwhelmed. He's emotionally and spiritually overwhelmed. He's in agony. And yet, the scripture records that in that moment, the thief who was being crucified next to him turns to him and says, Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. It was a prayer. And immediately, El Shammah hears that prayer and responds. And he says, truly I tell you today, you will be with me in paradise. So even in a moment when you could understand why God might not hear a prayer because he himself is so overwhelmed, he hears. He is El Shammah. He hears and he responds. And I think that's what happens in Psalm 28, because the first 5 verses of the Psalm, David is crying out and pleading to be heard. But there is a break between verse 5 and verse 6. Look at what it says in verse 6. Blessed be the Lord, because he has heard the voice of my supplication. The Lord is my strength and my shield. My heart trusts in him, and I am helped. Therefore my heart exalts, and with my song I shall thank him. What happens between verses 5 and 6? I think that God reassures David, I am El Shammah. I am the God who hears. I've heard you. And David responds by saying, my heart trusts in him, and I am helped. He has heard the voice of my supplication. So remember the name of God, El Shammah, the God who hears. Remember, and may your heart trust in that, and may you be able to rejoice.